Okay. The vision of our group is to have people use their data as much as possible all across manufacturing. And to that end, we have been investing in and delivering an enterprise manufacturing analytics since 2012. I feel like this is going to eat me. And as we prepared for this presentation, we counted up all of our deployments, and we've done 60 deployments. And so what I will take you through today is how did we get started, and what have we learned, and what is next. There are lots of definitions for big data and enterprise manufacturing analytics, so I always like to ground people on what we're trying to do. In our case, our take on big data is twofold. One is that the right people will instantly know when processes are trending out of normal, and also arm those people with tools for effectively figuring out what's going on, effectively collaborating, and once you have figured out what's going on, store that knowledge for the next time. This is the most important slide I'll show today. And it all has to do with what you have to really think about, what decisions you're trying to influence with data. And the way I show it here, and I have to apologize, I know the word operational analytics is used in a different way. These words come to us from a group within Dow, and so I'm sorry if the words don't quite match up. But what you look at here is at the bottom of the triangle, the width of that shows the number of decisions that are made. And in what we call transactional, those are changing one variable at a time type of decisions, and you make many of them, let's say, in a day. Up at the top are the strategic decisions having to do with large-scale capital investments. And you don't make very many of them in a company. That's why it's the top of the triangle. In between are what we call operational and tactical. Here we're managing, in the tactical, we're managing course corrections over weeks and months and potentially years, slow trends, slow deactivation of a catalyst or slow buildup of an impurity. And you need to actively manage them, maybe not on an everyday basis, but you need to manage them through that longer time period. The next one is operational, where you're making decisions across a plant or multiple unit operations or maybe across a site. Again, those are having to take into account competing phenomena, different scorecards, and you need to bring that together. At Dow Chemical, we have invested pretty strongly in tools for the transactional and the strategic levels, and so that hasn't been where we have been working. We have been investing in this, what we're calling the operational and tactical areas. The kinds of questions that you might ask, you guys have seen this before if you've been in any of the analytics sections, maybe posed a little bit differently. The kinds of questions that you can ask when you're dealing with your data or when you're asking your data to help you make a decision. The areas where we have been working is in what is happening now and what might happen next. And so our tools are mostly aimed at that intermediate area. So, yes, start your journey. Start it. You eventually need to achieve the vision of having your big data or your EMI or your data analytics approaches really become part of your company culture. And the place to start, I submit to you, a good place to start is to look at situations or look for situations where data are not being used well. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. And that way you can demonstrate those capabilities in situ or right with the people so they can kind of see what possibilities are there. Because I think in a lot of ways the consumers of this will be, they don't even know what to wish for. They don't even know what might be possible. So really to be able to show them with their data what is possible is really important. So let me take you through a couple of examples of good places to start. You can have a situation where you're maybe having quality problems. Maybe you're getting customer complaints, and well, not that you don't take them seriously, but you sort of half tolerate them because you maybe don't even know what was really going on. Or you tolerate having off-spec material that you then re-blend in with other material to get on spec. That's very expensive. That's a whole set of unit ops that you probably shouldn't even want to have. So if you see either of these situations where quality problems are basically tolerated as normal, that might be a place to get started. Another place to get started will be to look for operations that are in continual crisis. Because plants in crisis are often willing to try some out-of-the-box ideas because they've tried all the things they know how to do. And so it's good to take advantage of their desperation once in a while to show them the power of data analytics. Now, once you have gotten them through that, or once a plant has gotten through a problem and they have figured out what happened, oh, awesome, problem solved, we're never going to do that thing again. But then, then as time goes on, sometimes the learnings get a little bit forgotten. And you start having people whisper to each other, oh, no, 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 let's do it this other way. That other way was better. I know it was. And nobody really remembers. And that got talked about, I think, this morning, that the learnings get forgotten because people turn over and it isn't maybe written down in a way that is easy to get at. So if you use, and this is where we've had some of our most awesome successes, if you use your data to refocus that learning, then it's right in front of people all the time. So once you have decided what kinds of decisions you want to influence with your data, or what kinds of decisions need to be made, and you need to provide data to help people do that, and then once you've picked a place to get started, your next job is to put your data into context for that decision making. And this is just some graphics of all the different ways you can arrange your data. And the thing to know is that the boxes turn green or red, depending on if an alarm is violated or not. And so immediately you know where you need to put your attention. The other thing to note is that in every one of those places where there's a colored box, with a click or two later, or a click, you can get a graph or a series of graphs. So you have your context right there, but then you can also have your graphs right next to that context. So you can see the different kinds of layouts. There might be just a listing layout in the upper left. You might have a diagram of a plant. You might have a map laid out. But my favorite one is the one in the bottom left. And we'll look at that in a little more detail. There has been a lot of talk this week about context and having the data into context. And our group, I think one of the most important things we do is guide this conversation to peel out that context and peel out the knowledge that already exists. So our role in our group is to guide the conversation by asking leading questions, by asking dumb questions, by just keeping a conversation going amongst some experts or some subject matter expertise within that business. We guide that conversation, but then we also have to translate what they're saying into some actions. And the way we arrange our decision maps, we call them, is a series of yes-no questions. And I know that's really simple, but oh my gosh, there's so much money to be made by doing this. There's a series of questions, and then associated with the questions, a series of recommendations depending on the answer. And one of the things we do while we're guiding that conversation is also let the process data have a seat at the table. So if someone says, well, the temperature is never above 300, well, you bring up the data and you find out that half the time it's at 350, or whatever you find out. And so having the people talk about what they know, but also confronting them with, here's the reality of your data, leads to some very interesting conversations. And our group being able to do this is really awesome because, of course, as has also been discussed this week, the experts are dwindling quickly into retirement. And so if we can pick their brains before they leave and describe the important steps or the important things to worry about, and put data next to it, that's very powerful. One of the quotes, I have some notes here because I was listening all week, listening to different things that appealed to me. And one of the quotes I heard was, when you bring data and theory face to face, you can get some amazing insights. That was said this week. And that's exactly what happens. Sometimes we fight like children. No, the level should be this. But in the end, bringing out the knowledge from multiple experts has been really powerful. So now let me take you, those are places to start. I'm going to take you through two generic examples, or two, well, they were specific examples that I made a little bit generic for the purposes of the presentation. The first one has to do with managing laboratory data. Analytical equipment is used all over manufacturing, but in order to trust the results of that those analytical equipment, we have to run standards and make sure that those instruments are calibrated properly. And in this particular example, there were 55 instruments across 2 labs that measured up to 264 things. And so really, there should be 264 control charts that should be kept an eye on to make sure all 55 of those instruments are calibrated and performing optimally. So what was happening was, this was a dreary task that somebody in the lab had to do, and it used to take 24 hours a month to plot all 264 of those control charts. And it was a dreary, oh, I guess I'll get to it, Friday afternoon kind of a task. But now we put all of the control charts into a dashboard, and so the only things that turn red are the only things that you have to worry about. And so not only does it take less time to make sure your instrument or your laboratory is running appropriately, it takes less time, but it also allows them to be proactive. And so rather than drearily going, oh, I have to look at my control charts, it's just right there, right on your desktop all the time, so you can then proactively see, oh, that one jumped out a little bit, let me go recalibrate that instrument. So that's a laboratory environment in manufacturing. The next example has to do with improving the reliability of a process. And you see the picture in the upper right. I know maybe it's kind of small, but that's a heat exchanger. And I was just perusing the magazines this afternoon, and this is what a heat exchanger is supposed to look like. Go to the Chemical Engineering Essentials for the CPI Professional on the front cover. That's what a heat exchanger is supposed to look like. The black there wasn't supposed to be there. So, and the plant had repeated upsets, and which resulted in unscheduled shutdowns, and those are very expensive, having an unscheduled shutdown instead of a scheduled one. And as we looked at the data and we walked our team through that decision map concept, we realized that there were competing phenomena taking place. And so it was tricky. Well, I want the temperature high so that my catalyst is active, but I don't want it too high because then I might get polymer forming and I end up with the picture up on the top. So that these competing phenomena really needed to be pretty aggressively monitored over the 1 or 2 year lifespan of that catalyst. And so what we were able to do was capture the key data, the key calculations, and some key relationships. And we did put it with one of those decision maps, which I showed you before, to balance, with recommended actions to balance those phenomena. And what that was putting the data into context. And so now, those unscheduled shutdowns are a thing of the past. And this is an actual quote from my colleague in the business who said, look what can happen if we just watch the data. And we achieved the longest run ever. And this was a couple years ago, and we set records all the time now for how long we were running, because we're able to manage those competing phenomena more proactively and more aggressively across the whole time span. Okay, so as Mike mentioned, I did talk with him about the different kinds of value. So the big picture is, once you've put your data into context, you're going to figure out how to manage your process better, which opens you up to having new ways of doing business. And so I've showed you a couple of examples of how we were able to change how we've done business, but here's a couple more things to think about. There are some culture changes that can take place. You can have better commitment to your best practices because the data and the decisions are right in front of you. You can have better collaboration across geographies and technical backgrounds. Those of you who were here this morning heard Glenn Mutcher maybe speak, well, maybe I heard it. Glenn Mutcher speak a little bit about how Dow has some centralized facilities with experts that may or may not be physically located with where the plants are. And as you can imagine, that distance can get pretty long, or we can figure out how to collaborate. And these dashboards that we put together really helped that collaboration across the geographies and the technical backgrounds. I was joking that these dashboards are like a coffee shop. You kind of all meet up at the coffee shop and you can see what's been going on with the plant, and through the comments that you can put in, you can start having some conversation. You're also able to have more holistic thinking because a team went through the really hard work of figuring out what the important variables were, figuring out what the important KPIs were that would let you digest maybe a whole series of tags into one variable which represents a phenomenon or a key metric. So you get to have this more holistic thinking because you confidently know that the team of experts has looked at the whole picture. So culture change is awesome. Well, how does that turn into dollars? These are just some examples of improved performance. Fewer unexpected turnarounds was really important in that one example I talked about. Having those longer run times. You might have a case where you are able to have higher throughput or higher yield or increased capabilities because you've now figured out how to manage your process better. You should end up with fewer customer complaints and more satisfied customers. And in one particular case, a customer was very satisfied with us because we were able to do a continuous improvement program. Once your process is lined out and you really understand all the knobs and really understand what causes it to change, continuous improvement is really possible. And in this particular one case, telling a customer that we were doing that was part of the customer satisfaction. Yesterday, those of you who heard Jonathan Alexander speak, he mentioned the software doesn't fix your process, the conversation around the data does, and I totally agreed with that. So, hopefully you believe me that we've been able to do some really awesome analytics within Dow. I wanted to talk with you about how we have arranged our team. Our team has evolved since the mid-2000s, really in earnest in 2012, and we have two pieces to our team. Let me start on the right-hand side, and that is the foundation. And this is really the IT foundation. Having our servers in place, having our licenses figured out, having some training of some best practices, establishing best practices, having that foundation in place, but also know that that foundation will keep an eye on upcoming technology and keep pushing the technology along. That's one huge piece. The second piece has to do with client interface. So we don't just say, hey, we have a bunch of servers, we bought some software, go, right? We don't tell the business that. We walk with them. We walk with them through understanding what data they have, understanding what knowledge they have, and who might be able to tell us about that or where it might be written down, and what decisions need to be made. Like I said, that triangle with thinking about what kinds of decisions you're trying to influence is the most important thing to think about. Believe it or not, we encountered some resistance early on. And it was because we had not understood, certain people thought we were trying to influence that bottom layer. Well, what are you trying to be, an operator from 4,000 miles away? No. We had to really explain that we were managing these longer term phenomena, these longer term trends. So we walk with the client, and it's very much a partnership. And my quote I wrote down for this one was, yesterday morning, Andy Chadha said, "It always comes to execution," at the end of his comments. And so this is how we've set our team up to be able to execute. All right, so I said we walked with the client. How do we go about doing that? In the green is a work process. Now, it's a pretty generic work process as you look over it. And many of my colleagues think of this as a very technical activity. Oh, I'm going to minimize the standard deviation of variable X, or I'm going to reduce my off-spec by a certain %, or we're going to increase our uptime by a certain %. And then they go about the business of finding what variables are there and configuring the presentation of the data and setting the limits. But the bottom line is you don't really change people's lives with math. This is part of it, but it's also very much of a culture change exercise. And let's see, I think I'm done there. And that's what really, and I think many of us have learned that lesson. I heard that a lot this week, that it's the human culture change that's really important. And so there are, believe it or not, some culture change experts in Dow. And so I consulted with them, well, how do we walk through that? I got the whole technical part, right? I get that. How do we walk the clients through so that the change will be sustainable? And so if you look at these pieces, and there's some references there, if you look at these pieces to culture change, believe it or not, you can map that onto our same green work process. And so one of the things our group is going through right now is confidently walking with the technical aspect, but also confidently being able to manage our stakeholders, being able to present the change in a way that they get how this is going to change their lives for the better. So we're in the middle of that journey right now. So to conclude, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's next. You might have noticed that I'm very passionate about this idea of making decisions. And out there on the web and out there in the world is this concept called a decision support system. And I really believe that what we do is support people's decisions. We put the right data in front of them in the right way, meaning I'm not going to show you minute data if you're looking at something over a 3-year period. You got to put data in front of people in the right way to support the decisions that they're making. And so far, I think we've demonstrated to our comfort that we've been able to incorporate data to help people make decisions. We've been able to incorporate models and knowledge. And the way we've incorporated knowledge so far is with those decision recommendations. And so we're there. So the next thing we need to work on, and we are working on, is figuring out how to put documents into that system and be as readily tangible as we've made the numerical data available. So we need to put the learnings from the past into the hands of the present. And Tuesday morning, I heard somebody from Schneider Electric say that we are doing real-time management of business. And so in order to support decisions in a real-time way, I think we're going to need to build in the document part and eventually the communication and the collaboration part. I never know where to point this thing. There we go. So to conclude, we have completed 60 deployments in a variety of environments since 2012. And the quote from one of our leaders is, "There's still a lot of money on the table to be made." And we assembled a group that helps the clients put data into context for decision making. And we're very conscious now that it is both a technical and a culture change journey. And we have a foundational group which takes care of the care and feeding of the IT foundation. Thank you.